F1 on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra.
The Formula One circus has travelled down under to Australia for the third round of the 2024 Formula One World Championship. And it is the most glorious day here in Melbourne, a balmy 18 degrees, and the sun is beating down on Albert Park Circuit. And of course, the tens of thousands of fans who are here to watch the first two practice sessions of the weekend. Max Verstappen, the three-time world champion, comes into this weekend as championship leader with 51 points to his name, 15 points ahead of his teammate Checo Perez, and it looks like Verstappen will be the man to beat this weekend. I'm Rosanna Tennant and I'm down here in the pit lane watching the drivers getting ready. I've just seen Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen in the Red Bull garage. The Mercedes drivers are in the car, and in the commentary box we have our lead commentator Harry Benjamin alongside the former McLaren F1 mechanic Mark Priestley. And Harry, this used to be the season opener. I don't know about you, but when I was younger I was so excited for that first race of the season here in Melbourne. There's still a feel-good factor, isn't there, given it is now the third race. Everybody's excited about going racing in Melbourne.
Melbourne is pure nostalgia for me. Getting up in the middle of the night back home in the UK and getting ready for the first bit of track action of the new season. New drivers, a lot of rookies have made their debuts here and stood on the podium as well. You go back to Lewis Hamilton, you go back to even Kevin Magnussen as well. 10 years since he first stood on the podium in his first race in Formula One for McLaren. But yeah, pure nostalgia. And there is some signs that it might be the first race for next season. That's not confirmed yet, but we might get that nostalgia back soon.
Do you know what? There is that chatter here in the paddock that we will be racing here for the first time in the season next year in 2025, and people are excited about it, Harry, I have to say. And Mark, we've had two races now, a glimpse perhaps at the pecking order for this upcoming season. The teams have had a bit of time to go away, look at some data, work on a few things. Who have you got your eye on this weekend to maybe make a bit more of a bounce back? Maybe Ferrari, can they get in amongst it when it comes to Red Bull this weekend?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think we have seen two very different races, but we've seen very similar outcomes. And I think really when you've got to look a few races from now until possibly Japan, when we get a much more traditional type circuit, really where we could properly say we've got a genuine pecking order. Very clearly Red Bull are out front, and it is going to be up to everyone else to start chasing them down. I think Red Bull, as you say, probably the best bet to do that, but they've still got quite a lot of work to do, particularly when it comes to race day.
Well, the music is blaring out of the Red Bull garage. I'm just watching Fernando Alonso head out into the fast lane of the pit lane. That's the noise you can hear. And he's got a lot of aero rakes on the car just behind the front wheels. So the team's going to be running some tests in this session, Mark, as well.
Yeah, it's pretty much always the way in FP1. I mean, with modern Formula One, you're very, very limited in when you can put a race car on track. The days of testing in between the seasons races are long gone now. So FP1 is the very first opportunity where you can try new parts on the car. These huge aero rakes that people will have seen on television, the big frames containing hundreds and hundreds of little sensors measuring the airflow over the car, and from that they'll get some really important data as to whether the components they've got on are working, whether they're doing exactly what they thought they were going to do, whether they match all of the simulation data. So it may not be the most intense performance related session, but it's huge when it comes to data collection.
As I was coming out into the pit lane, I walked past Andrew Shovlin, the trackside engineering director for Mercedes, and I asked him if he was okay, feeling all right ahead of the weekend, because the word on the street is that they're going to struggle this weekend. They're struggling with high speed at the moment. That's what Lewis Hamilton was saying at the end of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix weekend. He slightly rode back on that this weekend, perhaps not as worried, but Andrew Shovlin said, I look concerned. I thought he would be looking concerned. Harry, what do you reckon about Mercedes this weekend? Are they ones to watch or maybe even to be concerned about?
I think they're ones to watch and be concerned about, because Hamilton said, look, this isn't the evil sister again, this car. There is pace that can be unlocked, but as you said, high speed corners are now their issue, and this Albert Park circuit has a lot of them. They're having these issues with the bouncing and the porpoising of that Mercedes, and a loss of downforce plus grip is just costing them. There was talk about them going back to an old spec floor. We'll wait to see if they've actually done that. They haven't brought any big upgrades or any little bits and bolts for the car that have been declared, at least that we've seen from the FIA list. So it might be a bit of an uphill struggle for Mercedes in this round 3.
lights at the end of the pit lane. Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin leading them away. Behind him, a Sauber also running some aero rakes. And we've got the two Mercedes now heading out on the medium tyre. FP1 is underway. Harry Benjamin, let's get going.
Thank you very much, Rosanna. Indeed, the sun is shining and there are cars already queuing up and heading straight out. Some pausing for a practice start. One of the home heroes, Oscar Piastri, making his way on to the main straight after a practice start from the pit lane, and we are up and running for the first of 3 practice sessions to kick off this Australian Grand Prix weekend, and the crowds are already starting to fill up as we wind our way through this 3.2 mile, 5.2 kilometre, 14 turn track, 9 corners to the right, 5 to the left, and this will be the 27th Australian Grand Prix at Albert Park. And Mark Priestley, we've got 2 Aussies on the grid for the first time since 2013. Oscar Piastri in the McLaren and Daniel Ricciardo in the AlphaTauri.
That's right, and...
Well, I say AlphaTauri, sorry. No, the RB, yeah. Old habits.
Yeah, you've got to take a while to get used to that. But yeah, you're right, the second of those 2 drivers is Oscar Piastri, really, who is the guy that's really looking like favourite to get any kind of result here, because, of course, Daniel Ricciardo, at the moment, really kind of struggling to even match his teammate in that RB.
Yeah, he is. Rosanna, Ricciardo, is he out on track yet? I don't think he is. I know he is.
He is out on track. He's been fielding a lot of questions this weekend. A lot of people wondering about the future of the Aussie driver, whether he will have a drive in F1 next year, which is strange given we were all talking about whether he'd take the second seat at Red Bull next year. Just a word, Carlos Sainz has just left the Ferrari garage. Of course, huge speculation as to whether he would be here in Melbourne this weekend following that appendicitis and surgery in Saudi Arabia. Ferrari coming into the weekend saying they were expecting him to be back in the car. I spoke to him yesterday. I asked if he was rushing. He's just headed out on track. Goodness me, these Formula 1 drivers are made of serious stuff, aren't they, Harry? I wouldn't be jumping into a Formula 1 car only days and weeks after surgery. Let's see how he holds up.
Well, yeah, indeed. I don't think either of us would be able to fit into a Formula 1 car, Rosanna. We're too tall for that either way, appendix or no appendix. And the fact that he was back straight away pretty much in Saudi, albeit walking a little bit gingerly, we'll see how he gets on this weekend. He's still in the pit lane as it currently stands, but let's hear from him now.
Carlos, it's fabulous to see you back. Are you really ready, do you think? What have the doctors said? What have your family said? Is it your decision to go racing? And how are you going to go racing?
Well, I'll let you know tomorrow. First of all, I need to jump in the car and obviously see how I feel. But I've done everything I can to recover and to be fit to race. Obviously, 100% when you spend 10 days in bed and 10 days recovering is not the same as when you spend 10 days training, going to a simulator and preparing a race. So 100% I'm not going to be, but fit to race. I do believe I'm going to be fit to race, so let's see how I feel tomorrow, and I still think I can do a strong weekend and put together a good performance.
Some would say it's rushing back. Is there slight... Well, it's major surgery, isn't it? Going to sleep for an extended period of time?
I don't think it's... I wouldn't be here if my doctors wouldn't recommend me. So, F1 drivers or athletes, yes, we tend to rush things, but also because we have the methods to do so. The amount of stuff that I've done by doing different machines to speed up recovery, and the condition that I'm in today is a lot better than where I was obviously 10 days ago. And if I don't feel fit, I will not race, so I will be the one to judge.
And no motivation because you didn't want Ollie in your seat again?
Not at all. I'm happy for him to be again my star substitute again if I'm not fit to race.
Well, that was Carlos Sainz talking a little earlier to Rosanna. He is still in the pits, Mark, but Alex Albon had the exact same surgery a couple of years ago, and he managed. Oh, he is now out of the pits, but he managed to come back. Did Albon? So really, it should be copy and paste. But although everyone's different.
Well, yeah, that's right. And as Carlos, you just heard him say there, they do have the very best medical treatment, the best doctors. They've got personal trainers that they've worked with. They're in great shape anyway. They have access to this technology in terms of machines and the very best medical cover that money can buy. So if anyone's got a shot of speeding up recovery, it's an F1 driver. But you're right, everyone's different. I think Alex had a couple of complications. Let's hope that Carlos is fine, because I think at the end of the day, despite the brilliant performance that Ollie Bearman put in last time out, we'd all love to see Carlos back in his own seat.
Yeah, and I mean, Rosanna, it's an interesting time anyway for Carlos Sainz, isn't it? Because his contract comes to an end with Ferrari at the end of this year. He had to miss the last race where Oliver Bearman had a fantastic debut. Silly season is rife, although we're kind of expecting Sainz to be in a seat somewhere next season. It does throw the cat among the pigeons slightly. Here's Hamilton first.
His brake pedal's really long. Okay, copy.
Hamilton just saying this brake pedal is really long, so just giving some early feedback to Bono early doors. But yeah, it's an interesting time for Sainz, so he doesn't want to be out of that car for too long.
No, and I don't think he's got much to prove. I think that's what he was saying coming into the season. Of course, we all knew by then that Lewis would take his seat in 2025, and he sort of said, look, the guys and girls up and down the pit lane know the cut of my jib, they know what they're getting if they sign me up, so I don't think he's worried about that. So that was why it's interesting that he's jumped back so quickly into the seat, because you want to be race ready, you don't want to make a mistake, and I was interested, and that's why I asked him if he thought he was rushing to get back in, but as you heard, he completely pushed me back on that. Interesting time for him as well. We were talking about the team around the drivers and how they're looked after so well. Carlos has actually lost his trainer to Max Verstappen. Rupert Van Waring has moved across to train Max, so Carlos has got a new team around him, so hopefully it's the best team to make sure he's fighting fit and ready for this race weekend, as I think he just came back past me into the pits.
All right, well, at the moment, on the graphics and the timings, he hasn't set a lap time just yet, but we'll keep you abridged of how Carlos Sainz gets on. He says this will be the session to determine whether he does complete the rest of the weekend. Oliver Bearman is here this weekend on standby for Ferrari, but also competing in the Formula 2 race that's coming here, as Oscar Piastri just crosses the line to go second fastest behind Stroll. But, I mean, Mark, this is your first time in the BBC commentary box with us. How impressed with you with Bearman from Saudi Arabia?
What an amazing story. I mean, and that's, Carlos desperately wants to be back in his car, to show what he can do, but quite frankly, that story around Ollie Bearman and the performance that he put in was so impressive for such a youngster to come in with no notice. We all know how it played out now, and it's just wonderful. Carlos doesn't really want that to continue happening, because much as we do know how good Carlos is, and no one's going to suddenly lose sight of that, the story moves on so quickly in Formula 1 and you become yesterday's news. So he doesn't want the world to be talking about Ollie Bearman, he wants the world to be talking about Carlos Sainz, because he's looking for a new drive.
And I believe the Haas drivers as well don't really want to be talking too much about Oliver Bearman, because that's the talk of the town of where Bearman might end up. Hulkenberg, who is out on track at the moment in the Haas, scored a point in Saudi Arabia with some great tactical teamwork between Hulkenberg and Magnussen, holding up pretty much the entire rest of the field outside of the point scoring positions to ensure his German teammate could clinch that final point. Hulkenberg saying that everyone will forget about Bearman and his result from Saudi Arabia if he doesn't follow it up with a good Formula 2 season, and right now he currently sits last with 0 points in Formula 2, but there are extenuating circumstances for that. Sergio Perez goes fastest in these early stages of free practice one with a 1:19.9 on the soft compound tyre. For those wishing to do a sync up, it's 51 minutes and 25, 24, 23 seconds remaining of this first free practice one session. While we're on Sainz, just to finish that off, where do you think he'll go, Mark? Where do you see Sainz on the grid next year?
It's a huge question, and it is an impossible one to answer right now. There's a lot of people suggesting that a move to Audi could be on the cards, and it's a fairly obvious one in that they're a new team. They're going to be looking for someone with experience to perhaps pair with a younger driver. So there's an obvious opening there. I think there's obviously the seat at Mercedes, but I just don't see Carlos Sainz being a fit for that. I see a young driver coming in, and one of the things that Ollie Bearman did, one of the things Ollie Bearman proved, or at least backed up, because we've seen it many times before, young drivers are not to be scared of when you're a team principal. They can come in, they're well prepared, and they can do a job. So if you're Mercedes, maybe that's where you look.
13 drivers out of contract at the end of this season, Rosanna. Where do you think Sainz is going to go?
Well, it's it's interesting, Harry. I was talking to the team representative, as I have to call him, at Sauber, Alessandro Aluni Bravi, yesterday, and he was saying that basically whoever comes in next year will be there for 2026. So he says they've got to give their current drivers at Sauber, Valtteri Bottas, Zhou Guanyu, as much help as possible so that they're in a good position when Audi come. But I would imagine a seat for Carlos Sainz is ready and waiting, and he could join next year, have 1 year before the rules and regs change in 2026, and then be ready to go with Audi. So, interesting one. I don't feel Carlos Sainz would move to Mercedes, because I feel that would just be a holding seat before they bring in the youngster Kimi Antonelli, who's in F2 currently and is being watched intensely by Mercedes. And I don't think Carlos Sainz would want just 1 year. Do you?
I mean, I actually agree with you on all of that stuff, Rosanna. I think it's fascinating in that there's so much potentially moving about next year, and on top of the sort of stack of cards that Lewis Hamilton has started the tumbling of, here's Nico Hülkenberg.
Well, we're smoking the plank on the back straight there.
Okay, understood.
Hülkenberg, wow, we're smoking the plank on the back straight here. So that's the plank, Mark, I presume he's referring to, that's on the underside of the car.
Yeah, he's just suggesting the car's running a bit low, getting very hot, rubbing along the tarmac and literally smoking. Gets very hot and burns. So there you go, that's what he's on about. Maybe need to raise the ride height a little bit. But just to quickly go back to that driver market thing, in amongst that whole mix of Lewis Hamilton starting the sort of domino effect of drivers potentially moving around, we've already got talk of Max Verstappen potentially leaving Red Bull. So imagine that little hand grenade being thrown into the mix, and who knows where anybody ends up.
Yeah, there is supposedly a clause in Max Verstappen's contract where if Helmut Marko leaves the team, the motorsport advisor to Red Bull, or if he leaves the team, that can invoke a clause within Max Verstappen's contract, which means he will be able to lead the team as well. He does have a contract through to 2028, and this is the sound of Verstappen that you can hear at the moment, just making his way through turns 9 and 10. Bit of traffic to the inside as he then brakes for the right-hander of turn 11. But I think, Rosanna, if Verstappen were to leave, that would throw the market into overdrive.
Yeah, I think the journalists in the F1 Media Centre would have a lot of exciting writing to do, especially our very own BBC Chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson. Interestingly, Sergio Perez, Max Verstappen's teammate, was asked in the press conference yesterday whether he had a clause like Max Verstappen did, and he said, I don't know what clause Max Verstappen has, but Sergio did confirm that he didn't have a clause like Max. And then he was asked what effect it would have on Red Bull if Max were to leave, and he said it would be a blow for the team if Max were to leave, and I do think it would be. It would be a very, very strange move, but perhaps he sees an opportunity with Mercedes. It's weird though, because you'd think Red Bull really are nailed on for a championship in 2025.
Yeah, but you know, I get the feeling with Max Verstappen on several fronts that if he retired next season, I wouldn't be that surprised. I don't know, would you, Mark?
I mean, I absolutely see where you're coming from. He's already said he's got no desire to race into his 40s and collect championship after championship. He's ticking every box right now, and I suspect as long as he's enjoying it, you know, absolutely he'll carry on. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think if something like that happened, it wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world.
Rosanna, retirement for Verstappen beckoning?
Look, he talks a lot. I'm not sure he's ready for retirement just yet. I think he's got a lot more racing to do. But I can see that perhaps he would like more of a challenge. But I don't see him retiring anytime soon. I think we've got Max Verstappen for a while to come yet. And who knows, maybe he's chasing down, albeit quietly, and not telling us that record set by Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton. Maybe he wants to get 8 championships and then hang up the racing helmet. But I can't see him leaving. I could see him leaving Red Bull, but I can't see him leaving Formula One just yet.
Well, I think, Rosanna, go ahead.
Yeah, we should get, if people are listening, you know, do get in touch. Maybe you think I'm wrong. Maybe you think he is going to retire. Yeah. Do get in touch. BBC F1 Live.
Yeah, I don't, to put the record straight, I don't think he's going to retire at this point, but I think if he did, it wouldn't shock me that much. I think my biggest sort of word of advice for fans watching on, thinking, you know, things are getting a bit monotonous right now. Max is winning everything. The future looks like it's going to continue to do that for some time. I think perhaps the biggest thing that could end up pulling Red Bull back, that could end up ending this run of dominance, is Red Bull themselves. I mean, if Max were to leave, we've got all sorts of political infighting going on. But if Max were to end up leaving that team through retirement or to move somewhere else, could that be the thing that completely destabilises the team that's walking away with the sport right now?
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely spot on with that. To echo what Rosanna said, hashtag BBC F1, get in touch with your driver market silly season suggestions. There are so many drivers out of contract at the end of this year, some big players on the market, with Fernando Alonso as well, and Aston Martin saying in the build-up to this weekend that he won't let others dictate his destiny in Formula One. So where will Alonso be? Will he stay with Aston Martin? Will he go somewhere else? The dominoes will begin to fall. We just need that first one to click into place. And let's not forget that kicked everything off at the start of the year. Lewis Hamilton signed for Ferrari. Not this year, but next year in 2025. And there are so many young, talented drivers in Formula 2 ready and chomping at the bit. We've seen what Oliver Bearman can do. We saw what Liam Lawson could do last year as well. Arguably, he deserves to be given some sort of Red Bull outing. And there are lots of others. Andrea Kimi Antonelli also in F2 as one of the Mercedes juniors. 44 minutes and 6 seconds remaining. Max Verstappen is currently fastest with a 1:18.6, ahead of Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, who is about 0.4 of a second back, currently in the pits. Rosanna.
Yeah, and he's splitting the two Red Bulls, Harry, which I fear could be what happens this weekend. And I don't mean fear in a bad way. I think this is good. I think Ferrari getting in amongst it. We heard from the team principal at Ferrari, Fred Vasseur, coming into this weekend, saying that he expects to be front runners on this track this weekend. And maybe that's why Carlos Sainz was so eager to get back into the SF24. And they are going to be adopting an aggressive approach. We might hear from Charles Leclerc a little later on, because I asked him what Fred meant about that. But interesting, isn't it? It seems that Ferrari are the ones that have risen to the top and are the ones that are trying to get closer to Red Bull. They're the only ones to have stood on the podium thus far. And it looks like that at the moment they're going to outperform the likes of Mercedes, Aston Martin and McLaren.
Well, you know what, Rosanna? Let's hear from Charles Leclerc now, shall we?
A few things that Fred Vasseur, your team principal, has said coming into the weekend. He was saying that you're going to be front runners this weekend. Is that Saturday or Sunday he's talking about, or can you mix it with Red Bull for both days?
Well, I can agree with him on Saturday. On Sunday, I still feel like Red Bull is going to have the upper hand. I mean, they've had the upper hand for the first two races on the race, so I will expect the same here. And in qualifying, it's always been close. So if we put everything together in qualifying, I'm sure we have a chance for pole position.
He also says you're going to be taking an aggressive approach. What does that actually look like? What does he mean?
I don't know. I'll ask him now. I'll ask him. I think what he means is that we are not leaving any thousands on the table, and that we are really squeezing the maximum out of this car. And that means that sometimes on certain things on the car, you might want to take a bit more margin for temperature reasons or for whatever reasons. We don't want to do that. We want to be at the absolute limit of what the car can achieve. And that is probably what he meant by having an aggressive approach.
Thank you very much.
Well, great to hear from Charles Leclerc speaking a little earlier to Rosanna. And Rosanna, to me, there does feel like there is a bit of momentum behind Ferrari that's building, you know, and I think they're timing everything right with their signings, not only in the driver department, but behind the scenes in the technical departments as well, and with Fred Vasseur at the helm for this big engine regulation change in 2026. Ferrari are really gearing themselves up for that, I think.
Yeah, and they've had a week and a bit to have a little look at how the car's performing in relation to the sim. Enrico Cardilli, their tech director of chassis, saying that there's good correlation with their sim tools. So it seems like everything is gelling together. And let's not forget, this track here, Albert Park Circuit, is you want to be at the front. I know that sounds very simple, of course you do, but track position is king here. So when Fred Vasseur, the team principal of Ferrari, and Charles Leclerc are saying that Saturday could be a good day for them, if they can take pole position and make that Ferrari as wide as possible, as wide as Kevin Magnussen's Haas was in Jeddah a week or so ago, then who knows? Maybe, just maybe, they could keep Max behind, and if they can hang on for quite a few laps, maybe they could take a win. But it's a big maybe, but it's something to watch out for this weekend, given how important track position is.
You're selling it well, Rosanna.
I mean, I think what Charles Leclerc was talking about, or Fred Vasseur rather, was talking about in an aggressive approach, is kind of exactly that. Targeting qualifying as a focal point of your weekend. And what I mean by that is when you go through the first 2 practice sessions and a third practice session on Saturday, you start to set the car up. You change and adjust the settings of the car, and you can change the parameters of the car and how it behaves in certain environments, right? So you can change that focusing on one-lap performance, and normally what you do is balance that for the longer run pace that you need on the race, where you're going to look after tyres. Well, if they target the 1 lap of Saturday and find themselves on the front row, then absolutely, as Rosanna just touched on there, it's not the easiest place to overtake upon. So maybe that's the kind of aggressive approach to the weekend Ferrari look into this weekend.
And well, could they get their first pole here since 2022? Charles Leclerc taking pole and then following that up as well with the win. And Ferrari, of course, 9-time winners, the most of any around this Albert Park in Melbourne. We'll wait and see. They certainly seem like the second best team as it currently stands. 39 minutes and 18 seconds remain. Max Verstappen is fastest ahead of Leclerc. Then it's Perez, Piastri, Tsunoda in the RB has just popped up into 5th as his teammate Daniel Ricciardo picks up a little bit of gravel on the exit of 13. Sainz is 7th as Stroll just hops up to 4th. Ocon, Ricciardo and Norris round out the top 10. Ricciardo did improve on that lap. Sargent is 11th. Magnussen, Joe, Hulkenberg, Bottas the top 15. Hamilton, Alonso, Gasly, Russell and Albon, the 20 drivers.
Brakes feel better.
Copy. Russell on outlap at the moment. Brakes feel better. He is reporting back.
Yeah, I meant to pick up on something that Lewis Hamilton said earlier, actually, which maybe people don't know at home. When he talked about the brake pedal being long, it's relevant now because George Russell's just mentioned that his brakes are feeling fine. What he means by the brakes feeling long, or the pedal feeling long, he's not talking about the dimension of the actual pedal. He's talking about how much it moves when you press it. These brake pedals in a Formula One car, unlike your road car, move not much more than around 10 or 15 millimetres when you press it as hard as you physically can. They're putting 100 bar of brake pressure through that brake pedal, and it moves almost nothing. So a driver that gets in a car like this every single week will notice if there's an extra 5 mil of movement in that pedal, and it signifies maybe there's a little bit of air in the system. It was after Lewis Hamilton's installation lap, so the first lap out of the day. They'll just come in, they'll bleed those brakes. If there is any little remnants of air in there, they'll get that out, and that will bring that brake pedal back to being as solid as he wants it.
Well, his teammate Russell, who was reporting back about his brakes feeling better now, currently personal best in Sector 1 and Sector 2. He's only done the outlap, 20th and last as it currently stands, so we'll see where this one slots him. DRS wing open as he makes his way down to the right-hander of turn 11. 4 DRS zones around this Albert Park track, which, if you remember a couple of years ago, there were significant changes around several corners to widen parts of it. They got rid of the old 9-10 chicane as well, and have increased the overtaking opportunities. And last year, well, we had 3 red flags. Not sure if that was quite the carryover that they wanted, but it certainly spiced up the racing action. Russell crosses the line and goes 11th fastest. Verstappen still currently the fastest. Everybody has been out on either the soft or the medium compound of tyre. This is the sound of Fernando Alonso, who just has a little bit of a moment coming through.
That wasn't a little bit of a moment, mate. That was very nearly in the wall. He got onto the gravel and just about managed to hang on to the back end, because there is gravel traps, there is bits of grass, but on the other side of that, because this is effectively a street track, there are walls.
Yeah, lost the car activity in 10. Yeah.
Okay. Alonso, I lost the car a bit, only a bit.
And it's a high-speed corner,
side,
isn't it, as well?
It reminds me a little bit of I think it was back in 2008 or something, a shunt for Timo Glock in his Toyota, which absolutely shattered his car. Not quite the same for Alonso, who just manages to ease off the throttle and control the car over the gravel and safely back onto the track, but that'll certainly wake you up a bit.
Well, I'm sure everyone at home will remember that monumental crash that Fernando had in the McLaren at this very circuit. I mean, goodness me, that was one that goes down in history. But that's one of the things this circuit throws up, and I don't mean spectacular crashes, but I mean incidents. You said last year there were 3 red flags, unbelievable stuff. this is the kind of circuit that's high speed. It's got walls very close, but it also has the grass and the gravel traps. And unlike Jeddah last time out rather, which was also a very high speed street track, it's all walls. Here, it encourages the drivers just to push that little bit harder because there is a gravel trap. But you drop a wheel over that curb, you can be in all sorts of trouble.
Absolutely. Alonso, it was with Gutierrez, wasn't it, in the Haas turn 4, which has been the scene of many a crash here in Melbourne over the last several years. So far, only Alonso having a little skirmish, or a big skirmish, over into the gravel through turns 9 and 10, which Pierre Gasly safely navigates in his Alpine. He's currently 20th and last. Let's get an update on Carlos Sainz with Rosanna.
Carlos Sainz is still in the car. The car is still in the garage, and they've been working on it. The mechanics have been making some adjustments to the pedal box. The bodywork has now just been put back on, and the mechanics are now just working at the back of the car on a few bits of just out of my line of sight, it has to be said. But hopefully he'll be able to get out again fairly soon, because with this appendicitis and the surgery that he's had, he's going to want to make sure that he is totally confident he can continue his race weekend, because it would be foolish to go on any further if he's in too much pain. We were seeing some pictures coming into the weekend of him with some extra padding that he was going to be using around the seat belt area. Of course, that's where it would press really on the stomach of the driver, and he's had keyhole surgery, so he's got a scar in his tummy button and then 2 other scars. So I know you might be thinking, like I was, that there would be one large long line across his stomach, but of course the amazing surgery techniques used these days means it was keyhole surgery, so it's not as bad as it might be, but I'm sure he'll still want to check that he is really ready and race fit for this weekend.
Have you had your appendix out, Rosanna?
No.
Mark?
I'm just imagining the worst.
No, I haven't.
I'm just imagining the worst.
No, none of the team have had their appendix out. Producer Joe? No one? No Pete? No one's had their appendix out in the team.
Harry, it was quite funny yesterday. Ted Kravitz, who I'm sure everybody knows from Sky, was talking to... Yeah, exactly, just to introduce him. He was talking to Carlos, and he said, I wanted to say hello, chili, but now I don't think chili's probably what you're allowed to have, because Carlos Sainz has a bit of a penchant for spicy food, and he has a little chili on his helmet and some of his merchandise. But of course, that's an appendix usually deals with all of that sort of spicy stuff. That's it. So now he hasn't got it. Maybe he needs to tread a bit more carefully.
Is that what it's for? I thought the appendix was just a bit of a useless thing these days. That's why you could chop it out.
Goodness me, sorry, that was Nico Hulkenberg in the Haas, absolutely lighting it up going down the pit lane. I thought it was for that, but maybe given it's so redundant, who knows?
I just checked the floor because I bottomed out pretty bad.
Yeah, okay. Norris asking the team to check the floor because he's bottomed out pretty bad. Appendix aside, Mark, what does Lando mean when he says that?
Well, he's talking about bottoming out, which means the car hitting the floor, hitting the racetrack. And this is actually, we can link this back to the Carlos Sainz chat that we were just having there, because there's been a lot of discussion, and Lando's been quite vocal about this, about these cars being really quite brutal to drive. And he means exactly that. They're so stiff, they're so low to the floor because of this ground effect aero they need to get, that if they touch the curbs, it bounces the driver. He's getting massive impact up and down from the porpoising and the bouncing that the cars have, particularly over bumpy street circuits, that the drivers are feeling it, in their body. They're suffering at the end of a Grand Prix. Well, if you're Carlos Sainz, you've just had surgery. I was just going to say that Carlos may already have a very clear idea after those first few laps at one element of whether he'll get through this weekend or not. He might be sitting in that car thinking, my goodness, that hurt more than I thought. Or he might be thinking, well, great, the first stage I'm okay. The next barrier or the hurdle to overcome is, can I sustain this over the whole day? And by the end of play tonight, then he'll have another idea whether the actual, sustained impacts he's receiving are causing him problems. But it's not something to be sort of sniffed at, how brutal these cars are to drive today.
Absolutely. And I suppose, as you mentioned there, Mark, Rosanna, it's exacerbated by the type of track we go to. And so far, the first 3 races of the season are all 3 very different types of track.
Yeah, and this circuit is incredibly bumpy. Let's not forget, it's not a permanent circuit. There's a lot of road surface here in terms of public transport during the year that we're not here. So it's a pretty bumpy one, and that's obviously going to play on Carlos Sainz's mind as well. So I would imagine we'll hear quite a lot from the drivers this weekend about the bottoming out, and we know that Mercedes are also bouncing. So there's a lot of bouncing and bottoming out going on down here.
Well, thank you very much, Rosanna. We'll come back to you with that for more updates.
Sounds like a party.
Yeah. I hope, has everyone got their appendix? 30 minutes and 37, 36 seconds remain of this practice one session. Lando Norris now fastest in that McLaren, a 1:18.5. Verstappen heading out on an outlap at the moment on the soft component side. Then it's Tsunoda, Leclerc, Perez the top 5, Stroll, Ricciardo, Piastri, Sainz, Albon the top 10, Ocon, Hamilton, Russell, Sargent, Bottas the top 15, Magnussen, Joe, Hulkenberg is going for an apple at the moment, personal best coming through sector 2, he's 18th, Gasly 19th, and Alonso 20th and last as it currently stands. Last saw quite a lot of work going on, I think it was his car, in the garage, so we'll see what's going on with Alonso after he had that off-track excursion into the gravel at turn 10. We haven't really spoken too much in depth, Mark, about our home heroes, Oscar Piastri and Daniel Ricciardo. Let's start with the higher of the two, actually. It's Daniel Ricciardo in 7th as it currently stands. He says this is really going to be the kickstart of his season, because the first 2 races, let's face it, they haven't gone well. He's been beaten by Tsunoda in terms of pace throughout the weekend. Hasn't really looked like he's brought this Ricciardo fire that's going to grab him the second Red Bull seat next year.
Yeah, absolutely right, and it's kind of disappointing, isn't it? Because look, when Daniel was out for a while with that injury, of course, he came back, put in some really strong performances. I think most people are pleased to see him back. We've even been talking about his name being attached to that second Red Bull seat in the near future. Is he the guy that might step up and take Perez's seat, be Max Verstappen's teammate again? I mean, who knows yet? But at the moment, in the RB, he hasn't done enough. So this needs to be the kickstart of his season. He needs to get things on track, because the first stage, as we all know, is beating your teammate and beating your teammate consistently, and that's the first hurdle that he's got to overcome. He's already had a hurry up from Helmut Marko at Red Bull that he needs to get things moving again. He hasn't managed to do it, so he has to do that here at home. But he is now up against, as you said, another home hero in Oscar Piastri, potentially there to take the limelight away from him.
Yeah, Ricciardo, best race result here of 4th back in 2016 and 2018. He was on the podium, of course, back in 2014, but then got disqualified. So there's a bit of bad luck for the Aussies around their home track. I mentioned a moment ago about Fernando Alonso, a bit of work going on his car after an off-track excursion into the gravel at turn 10. And Rosanna's got more.
Yeah, absolutely. They are changing Fernando's floor as a result of that off. But they're thinking it'll take about 15 minutes. That's what the team are saying. And at the moment, I'm standing outside Alonso's garage, and you can't really see in because everybody who's perhaps at a loose end, I'm thinking some of the social media guys, Jess Hawkins watching on, they've all been tasked with standing at the front of the garage to block our view of what's going on. So the floor being changed on Fernando Alonso's car. Meanwhile, just next door in the McLaren garage, Lando Norris's car is up on the hydraulic jacks, and his front wing has been taken off. The front end of the car not there. Oh, now it is. I'm back there. It has been put back on and the car is down. That is how quick these mechanics work. But Mark Priestley, you'll know that because you're a former F1 mechanic from McLaren.
They're all well drilled in this stuff. It's all. I still find it hilarious that people line up at the front of the garage as a human wall to protect people like you from seeing
old school.
It is old school, isn't it? This is the height of technology in Formula One, and yet we still use a bunch of humans to block people's vision. But the point of it is that the floors on these cars are one of the most sensitive areas, one of the most closely guarded secrets when it comes to aerodynamics. And if they're taking the floor off Fernando's car, putting a new one on, what they don't want to do is let TV cameras and photographers get a very clear view of it, because it immediately then becomes into the public domain in the hands of the other teams.
Just saw a replay, of Max Verstappen having a bit of a hairy moment coming through the exit of turn 7. It's the slight left-hand kink, and he's gone in a little bit deep. I think hit a little bit of the raised curb and the bump, and it's just set him off kilter, nearly going towards the wall that greets you, which makes the bend of the right-hander of turn 8. So a bit of a moment there, Mark, for Verstappen.
It was, and it's high speed. Everything around here is typically quite high speed, and it's actually symptomatic of these modern cars. I touched on it a moment earlier, but 3 years ago, you'd have easily been able to ride that curb. Today, because we've got this ground effect car, and to get the most out of the ground effect car, you need to have the aero platform, i.e. the bottom of the car, as level as you can and as stable as you can at all times, and that means they run them very low and very, very stiff, and if you hit a curb, you're launched up into the air. It's a real issue. The drivers don't like it. It actually makes the track a bit narrower because teams can't use the curbs in the way they used to, which potentially makes overtaking more difficult. It's an area and a development path that personally I don't particularly like, and I'd love to see it go back to a little bit more compliance in the cars, where the grip is a bit more mechanical, and we free up what we can of these racetracks. Many of these racetracks are not wide enough for modern Formula One cars anyway. If we now say you can't use the curbs, they become even narrower.
Yeah, very good point, Mark. Well, Verstappen lives to fight another day. He's actually just been knocked down to third fastest at the moment. Stroll has got up to second in the Aston Martin, just a 10th separating him in the top spot for the time being, which is held by Lando Norris. Rosanna.
Yeah, now outside Lando Norris's garage, he's in the car is back down, waiting to be sent out, tyre blankets are on. But are we going to see a bit of damage then to the cars this weekend? I think that the floors come off. I know Fernando Alonso had an off, and that's why his is off. We had Lando Norris worrying about bottoming out. I think might be one to watch. You never know. This track could bite back.
Well, I think you're right, Rosanna, because if you think about Jeddah, which is a pure street circuit, I mean, this is a sort of street circuit, but as I said earlier, it's got this sort of combination of corners with gravel traps and everything else. At Jeddah, you don't have the same sort of curb situation because the edge of the track is a wall, so you don't necessarily need the curbs to delineate the edge of the track. So we never had that as an issue. Of course, you're going to damage your car like Lance Stroll found when you hit the wall, but here, curbs are potentially going to be a problem, and the key to a fast lap, not only not damaging your car, but a key to a fast lap is actually staying off them.
I tell you what, in the race director's notes that Niels Wittich puts out through the FIA at the beginning of every weekend, they actually noted that they've removed some of the raised curbs at certain corners on the exit of turn 4, on the exit of turn 10, and that they've actually installed a concrete strip on the exit of turn 11 behind the curve. So I wonder if that's sort of been done to try and mitigate these sorts of things happening.
Yeah, I think so.
That's worth noting. What we've already described is a very bumpy track as well, so it really does exacerbate these kind of things. And a fast, high-speed track, 3.2 kilometres through Parkland in Albert Park, on the southeastern tip of Australia. 23 minutes or so remaining. We've spoken about one Aussie on the grid. The other, Oscar Piastri, has just put himself in the McLaren into 6th spot. And there's been a bit of momentum around Piastri and McLaren, particularly this weekend. Scored his first points here last year in Formula One through survival, I think, mainly, is fair to say. One of the few cars to survive that race of certainly red flag and attrition. But Piastri, I feel like, as well as getting on top of some of the issues that he had last year, which was the race pace and the tyre management, he's also just coming into himself a bit more with his personality. He's really developing into one of the top Formula One drivers.
Agreed. He's a rising star. He's gained experience over, of course, that first year, and all of that helps. It's what we saw last year in a number of occasions was his raw speed. He was able to stay calm under pressure, and he delivered some astonishing race results, really. This year, he can have all of that, which is inherent within him, but add to that the experience of a year behind the wheel, not just driving the car. And, of course, don't forget, these cars are a simple evolution of last year. They're not a complete revolution. So he can take all of that from last year and put it into this year. He's got experience of how to deal with things like the media. This is not his first home race. All of these things that he's now done before just become a little bit easier, which should hopefully allow him to focus on the job in hand, which is his bit behind the wheel. And over the course of a race weekend, I think we're going to see that.
Big moment, Mark. Sorry, for George Russell. That makes Fernando Alonso's moment in that same corner, the turn 9-10 chicane. Look, absolutely nothing at all. Russell ploughing into the left-hander, completely loses the rear end of that Mercedes. Save of the, well, maybe not the century, but certainly save of the season from Russell. Manages to get it pointing back in a straight line, cuts the grass and rejoins immediately off the throttle. But that was scary. We're going to get another look at it now. So he comes DRS, brakes into the left-hander, and as soon as he comes in, he just loses the rear.
The car ended up, I'd say, 45 degrees from the direction it should have been pointing, and then snapped back the same amount the other way, and still he managed to get it back under control. And as you say, just ran across the grass. Here he is.
Just confirm everything all right with the car. Yeah, fine.
It's such a high-speed corner that you're relying on the aero, the downforce of the car to give you grip. And the moment you lose that, you lose everything. And the car just snaps away. You lose all of that grip that you're dependent upon. And the car ends up, or the driver rather, ends up with the passenger.
Well, certainly sounding cool, calm and collected on the radio. Bottas in the Sauber has just had an off in the same corner going across the gravel in turn 10. It was only caught the end of it. We didn't see how it happened, but he certainly picked up a few bits of gravel and tyres, looking a little bit worse for wear in that fluoro green Sauber for the honorary Australian Valtteri Bottas, who certainly embraced the culture. Long-term girlfriend Tiffany Cromwell being from Australia. This is the sound of Bottas. Had the same moment as Russell coming into the left-hander, lost the rear, but then couldn't save it.
Yeah, all good. Okay, copy.
And did manage, though, to do, pretty much a 360 and rejoined in a straight line. The tyres, though, pretty wrecked, Mark.
Yeah, those tyres are destroyed. I mean, we're seeing a lot of incidents, a number of incidents at that corner. We've actually got a red flag, so we'll find out exactly what that's for in a moment. But I wonder if it's a wind sensitivity. I wonder if there's...
and it's for the Williams of Alex Albon, who was missing his front right wheel, which is currently resting up against the wall. It's Albon, who is currently on that's coming into sector 2, isn't it? I think it's turn 8. Says he's okay, and I think he's currently the reason for the red flag. And I think that is, just coming through the sort of long right-hander of turn 8. He's clearly come together with the wall and has found that Williams now without its front right tyre. James Vowles, team principal of Williams, with a look of concern from the pit wall, but Albon okay on the radio as he clambers out of that stricken Williams. And Williams, who are in the fight with everybody who is not a top 5 team. If there is a point up for grabs, it is between, Williams, Alpine, RB, Sauber, Haas, and this is not the start to a weekend that a team like Williams would have wanted. He had a crash a couple of years ago as well, did Albon. It was last year. He was one of the cause of the red flag. He brought out the first red flag in, I think it was a little earlier in the lap. But one of the reasons, and he's strewn a lot of debris on the track. I tell you what, it's very reminiscent to what happened to another Williams car, Pastor Maldonado, back in 2012, hunting down Fernando Alonso in the final stages of the race, lost it, went into the wall and speared the Williams across the track. We still haven't seen how it quite happened. I think we're about to see it. This is the sound of that Williams as he comes into the right-hander.
Curbs, hit the curb. He got bottomed, he beached himself, he ran over the curves. Remember what I was saying about the cars running so low with such stiff suspension? You can imagine if the bottom of that car, the plank as they call it, it's the same moment Max Verstappen had, but of course this far worse. It runs over the curb, that effectively raises the wheels of the car off the ground, and at that point you're almost like a boat just sailing across that curb. It's very high speed, he cannot get it back under control, and he ploughs in with his front right into the wall, the concrete wall, and that's a big one.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
And that is very similar to his accident last year during the race. It happened a little bit earlier. He didn't sort of make it quite as far last year around through the right-hander of turn 8. But Albon then, not with the start to his weekend that he would have liked, or Williams, a team that have had a documented struggle over the last couple of seasons, but in particular into the build-up for this season, with James Vowles implementing a real change of culture and mechanism within how that team fundamentally operates. And big crashes like this are the last thing that kind of a team needs.
Yeah, of course it is. You know, they are on a new trajectory, and I firmly believe that there are good things ahead for Williams and they're on the right path. But just looking at that incident and the difference between the two, Max Verstappen a few laps earlier did exactly the same thing but managed to get it under control. Alex didn't. And I'm not suggesting that's a sort of a difference in skill level from driver. It was just the approach they hit the curve with. But isn't that interesting that the difference between someone who nothing ever seems to go wrong for in Max Verstappen, or someone who has a car that's so compliant, so under his own control, as opposed to a car down the back end of the grid that just seems to be a little bit more on the edge, and when things are not going your way, they really don't go your way. That's often the difference, isn't it, between champions and those who are not champions.
Yeah. Rosanna?
Well, talking of a non-champion, here I am.
You do yourself down.
No, it's all right. Just supply the segues. Do you know what? Alex Albon's always a bit of a talking point here. As you said, Harry, he was the first red flagger last year. And then, do you remember in 2022, he did 57 laps on the hard tyre?
Yeah, I remember.
Absolutely brilliant driving from the guy to finish, I think, in the points, didn't he? He had a disqualification, so he had to start from the back of the grid, but managed to work his way all the way up into the points-paying position. So he's a bit of a tyre whisperer. And talking of tyres, we've got some different tyre compounds here this weekend. Probably the biggest change for the teams and drivers to get their head around this year in Australia, going a step softer. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays into strategy, because it's normally a two-stopper here, isn't it? But with the softer tyres, who knows? C3, 4, 5.
Yeah, and there's a lot of intrigue around the C5 as well that they brought here, which they didn't bring last year, which is going to be this weekend's soft. It's the least used of the current generation cars, and it is a bit of an unknown. Only Hamilton did any kind of true long running on it, and that was during the Bahrain test. But track's much more abrasive in Bahrain, so it's an unknown for certainly the soft compounded tyre this weekend.
Well, which is exactly why almost everybody on the grid is on it right now, or were at the point when this red flag came out. They need to get some information on that tyre. I mean, actually, since they resurfaced this track, it's not as abrasive as it used to be, and tyre deg here is actually not that bad. It's bumpy in terms of how the drivers feel that through the car and how the car has to handle that, but in terms of actual abrasion and tyre degradation, it's not that bad. It has been traditionally a two-stopper. They're trying, because of that, because the tyre deg is getting lower and lower, that they're trying to introduce a softer set of tyres to try and make sure we stick with a two-stop race. I think two-stoppers are always more interesting, or typically more interesting, than a one-stopper. Personally, I think it possibly will be a two-stop, but not 100%.
Albon's on the outside of turn 8.
Yes, Mitchell's debris. We're checking the tyres. Is he all right? It looks pretty large.
He said he's okay, yeah.
And that was Lando Norris, who slowed down to almost a complete halt just to try and drive safely through the debris and not get too much on his tyres. It almost sounds like, I don't know if you heard it, someone sort of dropping a tray of glass almost.
Yeah.
The debris from Albon's Williams. It really was packed a punch.
Well, these cars, of course, I'm sure most people know, but they're largely made of carbon fibre. There's very few actual metallic components on them, other than things like the engine and gearbox. But they're largely made of carbon fibre, and that does shatter. It does splinter, and it goes everywhere. And the problem with it is, when it does splinter, becomes incredibly sharp. These tyres that we now know, very low profile, very stiff sidewall, but under pressure, of course, going around at very high speed, if they run over some shards of carbon fibre, it can very easily puncture and cause a big problem. Just to quickly finish my point about strategy and tyres, I think it's likely to be a two-stopper, but I think part of the reason, part of the workload going on right now on FP1 with learning about this soft tyre is to understand, can they make a one-stopper a potential option? Will this soft tyre actually last long enough that they can use it in a stint, or would it be a medium that becomes the sort of favoured tyre? That's what Session 1, FP1, is all about, is gathering data and understanding to learn how they play out the rest of their race strategy when it comes to Sunday.
I really hope it's not a one-stopper.
So do I.
I really hope, for all of our sakes. We are currently under red flag conditions in free practice 1, with about 12 minutes remaining due to a big crash for the Williams of Alex Albon coming through the exit of turn 7, and strewn debris and the front right wheel missing of that Williams on the exit of 8. Driver okay, but red flag while the marshals do an excellent job of clearing up that Williams, and they have already towed it away. Norris is currently fastest from Leclerc, Tsunoda, Perez, Stroll, the top 5. Verstappen, Piastri, Ricciardo, Sainz, Albon, the top 10. Magnussen, Sargent, Ocon, Hülkenberg, Hamilton, the top 15. Russell, Joe, Bottas, Gasly and Alonso, the 20 drivers. Everyone in the pits as we await a message to say when we can get this session back underway. Rosanna.
Yeah, I hope it's not a one-stopper. Otherwise, as a pit lane reporter, what am I going to be doing? Hey, no one thinks of me. It's lovely down in the pit lane, I have to say. A little bit of shade, but then in the fast lane, bright and beautiful. Very sunny here in Melbourne, about 18 degrees, but there is a bit of a breeze, which made me think that there's some cars, normally the Williams, not perhaps so much in this year's season, given the changes they've made to the car, cars that are quite sensitive to the wind, and obviously Williams were one of them. So a little bit of something to look out for, perhaps. And watching Toto Wolff, team principal of Mercedes, who's come out from the sort of engineering island, the fantasy island, as I think they like to call it at Mercedes, inside the garage, and he's standing looking back into George Russell's side of the garage, just having a little look at the car. I'd love to know what he's thinking. He's got his arms crossed, gritting his teeth. I can see his jaws clenching together. I wonder what he's thinking. I wonder if he thinks they've gone in the right direction finally, or perhaps there's more fine-tuning to come. We know that Lewis Hamilton wasn't happy at the end of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix weekend. Perhaps a little happier now he's arrived in Australia, but I do think there's work to do for this Mercedes team, because they're not right up there just yet, are they?
No, there's a huge amount of work to do for Mercedes. We mentioned at the top of this show, really struggling with this car through high-speed corners, and right now down in 15th and 16th. We'll see how they develop across the weekend, but of course a lot more work to do for the Williams mechanics, as we're just getting a notification through that the session will resume in about a minute's time, which is excellent. So we'll get about 8 minutes of running at the end of this FP1 session. But Mark, we just saw pictures of that stricken Williams being towed away behind the barrier. As a mechanic, what are those in the Williams garage thinking when they see that? What are the first processes that are going through their minds?
Well, they've got their head in their hands because it immediately obviously translates into a lot of work. And with FP1, of course, you have a limited amount of time before we then get into FP2. So it's not like you've got the evening and you can sort of take your time, be a bit more leisurely about it. You've got to crack on. And none of these crashes are small when it comes to Formula One cars, because you sort of end up replacing way more than you really need to out of precaution. You can't take risks with these things, but that was a big crash. So yeah, it's going to be all hands on deck. A lot of people are going to be missing their lunch today, that's all I can say.
Green lights, and we are back underway, Rosanna. Many cars pulling out onto the track.
Absolutely, queuing up to get out on track. The Alpine leading the way. We've got drivers pulling to the side to do practice starts. We've got Flovis all over the Sauber, because of course they're running upgrades, and I'm just watching them line up and file out onto the racetrack. They are going to want to maximise their track activity right now. We've only got 10 minutes left on the clock, just under that. They need to get as much data as possible. Interesting, most drivers on the soft, but I saw just before Lance Stroll going out on the medium, I think. So interesting to see what they do now for these last remaining minutes.
Yeah, it certainly will be. 8 minutes remaining then, as the majority of the field head out onto the track. You mentioned upgrades for Sauber. They've got some bits on the front wing and the end plate. Racing Bull, the RB team, whatever we're calling them these days, have some bits on the rear wing. The Williams on the rear of that car. Alpine are trialling a new beam wing. Aston Martin brought some bits to their front wing, and Ferrari also bringing some bits to their rear wing. So a few teams using Melbourne as the first track to bring in some more bits to test on their cars, as I suppose they try and stagger their strategy when it comes to upgrades this year. Not only are we dealing with the cost cap now, but we're dealing with the longest season in Formula One history, and that includes sprint races as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's a real it's a genuine real logistical challenge, as well as balancing the books, like you say. That the longevity of this season is something that we've never had to contend with before. And you might go, well, it's just one more race, but we're already very close to a kind of limit of what people are able to achieve.
Hamilton's off in turn one, turns into the right-hander, bails out of it, skates across the grass and rejoins. What is going on in Albert Park today? They're all having an off.
I think what Rosanna touched on earlier about the wind could well be an issue here. We've seen a number of cars go off at turn 10. That was Lewis at turn 1, opposite sides of the track, but I think the wind, as we watch it now, he goes in, he misses the apex, he gets a snap of oversteer just as he goes to the middle of the corner, and that puts him luckily in that corner over a curb but onto some grass. Nothing too serious, a little bit of gravel, but he's obviously well away from a wall at that point, and he lives to fight another day.
He does indeed, and crucially, no major damage that we can see to that car, but the underside.
Yeah,
well,
I mean, the trouble with going through grass is that you collect it all. It's literally like a sort of lawnmower going over there. You collect mud and grass, it clogs up all these little aero scoops, these tiny little flick ups underneath the floor, and that stops them working in the way they should. And we can't see any of that happening, of course, but Lewis will start to feel it. And with only 6 minutes left of this session, where they're all out on track, desperate to get an understanding of their car, that's not exactly what they wanted at the start. At the start of this final run.
No, it's not. Hamilton then having to bail out of the rest of that one. Russell, though, is out there as well, Rosanna.
Yeah, we saw Russell having a bit of a skirmish earlier as well, didn't we? Managing to catch the car. Did you say it was going to be the catch of the century, Harry?
Yeah, I did not. Yeah, it wasn't.
Almost.
Maybe century was a bit of an over-exaggeration. It just sounded good in my head, so.
I like a bit of hyperbole at this hour of the morning. Why not? No, it's looking pretty tricky out there for Mercedes. Whether that's the wind.
Sorry, Rosanna, you say tricky, and as you say that, Verstappen coming through the turn 9-10 chicane, runs a little bit wide, goes over the rumble strips and a little bit onto the gravel. Not quite as drastic as Fernando Alonso and Valtteri Bottas did a little earlier, but even the reigning world champion is finding a struggle out there.
Yeah, and the drivers have been talking about how challenging this circuit is, because I think in the past some of us have sort of thought, it's a bit of a procession, Australia. The Albert Park circuit doesn't lend itself to overtaking. We've got 4 DRS zones this year. That's obviously designed to help that matter. But it's looking pretty tricky for some of the great and the good drivers out there, including Max Verstappen, again runs wide.
And his teammate Sergio Perez. Rally style coming through turn 11, the rear end kicking out, the steering wheel full left hand down, and then he locks up coming into the tight left-hander of turn 13, runs deep, ruins the beginning and end of his lap, but gave us some entertainment, that's for sure.
It's a very scrappy session, isn't it? There's lots of people running off. Of course, FP1, that's kind of what you want. You want people to find the limits of things like traction. You want them to find the limits of the car and even the limit of the driver. Of course, what you don't want to do is to step over that limit too far, and Max Verstappen came very close. His teammate does the same. We've seen a number of drivers, let's hope they are finding the limit, and that's where they know to just back off a little bit. And that was the sound of Max Verstappen just riding that curb on the exit of 10, dipping his wheels into the grass and gravel, but he lives to sort of go through. He collected all sorts of rubbish on his tyres.
Bottomed out quite hard there.
Verstappen saying he bottomed out quite hard there. He certainly did, with a big plume of dust coming through the rear of that Red Bull. And this is the sound of his teammate who was coming through the right-hander of turn 11 and then just lost the rear, had to bail out of it, and then locked up the front left tyre going into the left-hander of turn 13, ran in too deep and dipped front right onto the grass as well.
I must admit, I always lock up there on the official F1 game as well. It's very difficult to get the car stopped, so I feel his pain.
It's all right, just a change in strategy, isn't it? And then we're all fine. Let's head back down to the pits where Rosanna Tenen is, and we're just seeing a replay, Rosanna, actually, of Hulkenberg having a bit of contact with the car in front of him. Sainz in the Ferrari. His Sainz.
I just got touched by a horse behind. I think with his front wing. Up it.
So Sainz described it best there, almost as if
it's the slowest speed crash I've ever seen.
I think Hulkenberg sort of wanted to go into the slow lane, but was too late in that decision making. So we'll see if that gets investigated or not, Rosanna.
That was the noise, wasn't it? I said to you, Nico Hulkenberg, the Haas going past very noisily. I think that must have been the moment that he was maybe hitting the brakes before he rolled into Carlos Sainz's Ferrari. We'll be talking about the Red Bulls having offs. Max Verstappen has been through the pits, stopped briefly in his pit box, and a mechanic had a good look underneath his Red Bull, I guess, to check for damage, for any debris, for any stones, gravel, to clear that, and he was sent on his way again. So all looking all right for the championship leader at this stage. And I know I was talking about Toto Wolff, team principal at Mercedes, earlier on. He'd come out of the garage and was looking at George's car. George Russell and Lewis Hamilton out on track at the moment, and Toto has resumed his position at Fantasy Island. But I tell you what, he's got his headphones on. He's not listening to music, obviously, I just hasten to add. He's got his headphones on for Team Radio.
Do you know that for a fact?
Best please. Well, look, I'm a journalist. I only deal in facts, but I am making that up. He is not looking best pleased. I think there's going to be a lot of head scratching going on for Mercedes. Currently, where where are they? Let me just look. Yes, 8th and 9th. Russell leading Hamilton at the moment, but lingering at the edge of the top 10. That's not where they want to be.
No, but if you look at Hamilton's results so far, that's kind of where he's at. Qualified 9th in Bahrain, finished 7th. Qualified 8th in Saudi, finished 9th. Russell's had a better time of it. Saudi exposed the weaknesses in that Mercedes car to a worrying level for Mercedes, but certainly for Hamilton, that's kind of where he is at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. And this is another circuit, I think, that is going to expose some weaknesses for Mercedes. I mean, this is a track that has some similarities to Saudi, but also a number of differences too. We've already touched on some of them. I think this is going to suit teams like perhaps McLaren a little bit better. We're seeing Lando Norris currently at the top of these timesheets, albeit just in FP1. Ferrari as well. Obviously, we're going to say Red Bull should go well here, even though they've had a sort of messy session. I think by the time the weekend shakes itself out, they'll be back in their normal positions. But Mercedes, are they even running out of excuses at Mercedes? This has been 3 years now where they've had consistent problems. They've even completely changed track and tried something new. And the worry with doing that was they're always going to be a couple of years behind everybody else who've been working on these development paths for a couple of years consistently now. Mercedes are kind of starting afresh, albeit with all the information they've seen on other cars. They've got to take some time to learn that and develop it and really make it work, and they're not doing that yet.
Well, and then now there comes the point of, well, they've kind of got to limp home with what they've got, because the next big regulation change will be coming around the corner in 2026, and they are making some signings behind the scenes. Most recently, Simone Resta, who's come on board as their strategic development director. He won't start that role until next season. Simone Resta, previously at Haas, he left the team at the end or at the beginning of this year. We weren't really sure why. He was kind of sent there from Ferrari, where he's worked for many years, was their chief designer between 2014 and 2018, was put out to Alfa Romeo for a year, then went to Haas, but he's been poached by Mercedes. So is this the beginning of Mercedes now starting to go, we kind of almost have to write off this ground effect era and look ahead to 2026?
I mean, what a sad situation as the checkered flag comes out to end FP1, but what a sad situation for a team that's dominated this sport for so long to be thinking in those terms. But you might be right, they have to start thinking about almost rebuilding, and signings like that, they're obviously going to be changing the driver lineup. Maybe these are the kind of things that build the success that they want again in the future.
Saying that, Russell crossed the line and went third fastest at the end of that session, so we could well be completely wrong. End of FP1 though, and there are a couple of laps being set, but it looks like Lando Norris will finish this session on top in the McLaren. His fastest lap, a 1:18.564 on the soft compound of tyre. 18 thousandths clear of Max Verstappen in the Red Bull in second, George Russell in third, then it's Charles Leclerc fourth, and Yuki Tsunoda in the RB, half a tenth off Norris, fifth fastest, ahead of Sergio Perez in the other Red Bull sixth. Lance Stroll was seventh in the Aston Martin. Carlos Sainz, returning from his appendix surgery, eighth in the Ferrari, ahead of Lewis Hamilton, ninth in the Mercedes, and Oscar Piastri, the first of the Aussies, in 10th for McLaren, ahead of his compatriot Daniel Ricciardo in 11th in the RB. Alex Albon in the Williams, who crashed out of this session causing the red flag, finished down in 12th. Then it was Magnussen, Sargent, Ocon the top 15, Hülkenberg, Gasly, Alonso.
I've damaged the floor. Okay, we'll take a look.
Alonso was 18th, Joe and Bottas, the two Saubers, 19th and 20th, and that was Hamilton just on the radio saying he thinks he might have damaged his floor after his off-track action. And you're just hearing Oscar Piastri.
It's probably the worst place that Red Bull could have stopped.
Copy. So Piastri coming in hot into the left-right chicane of turn 9 and 10, only to be greeted by a slow Red Bull on the inside as he came through the left-hander, which suddenly really tightens up the right-hand part of that chicane, and Piastri not too happy with that one. So a bit of a scrappy FP1 session, and lots to continue debating about when we get through to FP2 a little later on, Rosanna.
Certainly is. And Mark, you said at the top of the show that this is a big learning session. What have you learnt then from the last hour of running?
Well, we've learnt that you really have to stay off the curbs with these cars around this particular circuit. I've just seen an onboard of Lewis Hamilton riding the curve on his final part of the lap there, and the sort of brutality of what you experience sitting in the car is awful. You couldn't do that lap after lap during a race. So I think they'll have all learnt that. They've definitely learnt that the wind has been an issue for them, and it gets that snap of oversteer. What they haven't yet learned is anything about the harder compound tyre. They've got a few of those, of course, for the weekend. Most people, particularly the Red Bulls and Ferrari, in fact, only doing the soft tyre. So they've learned a lot about this new softest C5 tyre, and that will be important as the weekend goes on.
And Harry, we never like to read too much into FP1, but Lando Norris at the top of the timings. Does that mean that McLaren are going to be fighting up at the front this weekend? Can they mix it with Ferrari and even perhaps Red Bull?
Yeah, I think this is Norris's win in the bag, Rosanna, as far as I'm concerned, after that performance in free practice one. No, look, I still think Verstappen is gonna seal the deal on this one come Sunday, but the McLarens look good. I think the McLarens will do well, and if there is a bit of an upset in the race, or one of the Ferraris or one of the Red Bulls isn't quite up to scratch, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a McLaren on the podium come Sunday.
Oh, okay, so you're going quite big with your predictions.
Yeah.
Even though you just thought that perhaps you'd throw the Lando Norris win in there, why not? Look, it's been an interesting hours session. We've got another session coming your way later on, FP2, the second practice session here at Albert Park Circuit. We will be live at 5 to 5, so don't forget to set your alarms for that. My thanks to Mark Priestley and Harry Benjamin up in the commentary box. I've been Rosanna Tennant down in the pit lane. Join us at 5 to 5. Set your alarm. I know it's early, but it's going to be worth it. We'll be on Sports Extra. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.